When Java was designed in the mid-1990s, the internet was new and the idea of downloading and running code from unknown sources on your machine was terrifying. Java was designed from the ground up with security in mind, particularly for applets, which were small programs downloaded from websites and run inside browsers. The Java security model was the answer. The first line of defense is the bytecode verifier. Before any class is executed, the JVM reads its bytecode and runs a thorough analysis. It checks that the code never accesses memory it should not, never corrupts the stack, never performs illegal type conversions, and never jumps to an invalid instruction. Code that fails verification is rejected before it ever runs. The class loader is the second layer. It controls what code gets loaded into the JVM and from where. Critically, it enforces separation between classes from different sources. A class loaded from the network cannot pretend to be a core Java library class. The Bootstrap class loader loads trusted Java core classes. Application class loaders load your application code. This separation prevents one piece of code from impersonating another. The security manager was the third layer, a runtime gatekeeper that was consulted before any sensitive operation. Before reading a file, opening a socket, or accessing system properties, the JVM asked the security manager, "Is this allowed?" The security manager has been deprecated since Java 17 and is being phased out in favor of OS-level security and module system controls. The access controller remains and provides fine-grained permission checking based on policy files that declare exactly what permissions each code source is granted. Cryptography is the mathematical foundation of all digital security. Without cryptography, every password, credit card number, and private message sent over the internet would be readable by anyone who intercepted the network traffic. Symmetric encryption uses the same key to both encrypt and decrypt. You scramble the data with the key and the recipient unscrambles it with the same key. AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, is the gold standard for symmetric encryption today. It is fast enough to encrypt gigabytes of data efficiently. The challenge with symmetric encryption is key exchange. How do you securely share the key with the recipient without an eavesdropper intercepting it? Asymmetric encryption solves the key exchange problem with a mathematical trick: two related keys, a public key and a private key. Anything encrypted with the public key can only be decrypted with the private key. The public key can be shared with the entire world. There is no risk. Only the holder of the private key can decrypt messages. This is how HTTPS works. Your browser uses the website's public key to encrypt the connection setup, and only the website's private key can decrypt it. The downside is speed. Asymmetric operations are much slower than symmetric ones, so in practice TLS uses asymmetric encryption only to securely exchange a symmetric key, then switches to AES for the actual data. Hashing is fundamentally different from encryption. It is one way. A hash function takes any input and produces a fixed-length fingerprint. You cannot reverse the process. The same input always produces the same hash. But changing even one character in the input produces a completely different hash. This makes hashing ideal for storing passwords. You store the hash, not the password itself. AES is everywhere. Every time you connect to a website over HTTPS, your data is encrypted with AES. Every time you store a file in an encrypted folder or use WhatsApp, AES is working behind the scenes. It was selected by the US National Institute of Standards and Technology in 2001 and has remained unbroken since. AES works on fixed-size blocks of data, 128 bits at a time. The key can be 128, 192, or 256 bits long. The encryption process runs the data through multiple rounds of mathematical transformations using the key. With 256-bit AES, a modern computer trying every possible key would take longer than the age of the universe to crack it by brute force. Java's Cypher class is the entry point for all encryption operations. You request a Cypher instance for a specific algorithm and mode. The mode matters. ECB, Electronic Codebook, is the simplest but weakest because identical blocks of plaintext always produce identical blocks of ciphertext, which leaks patterns. CBC, cipher block chaining, uses an initialization vector to randomize each block, so identical plaintexts produce different ciphertexts. GCM, Galois Counter Mode, is the modern recommendation because it provides both encryption and authentication in one operation. You can verify the data was not tampered with. The critical security rule: never hardcode a key as a string in your source code. Keys should be generated randomly, stored in a key store, or provided through environment variables or a secrets management system. Source code gets committed to version control and can be read by many people. We call keyGenerator.getInstance and pass the string AES to it, which retrieves and initializes a concrete implementation of the AES key generation algorithm from the Java security framework, and this keyGenerator object serves as the factory that will produce our cryptographic key, and we then call keygen.init and pass the value 256 to it, which configures the key generator to produce a key that is exactly 256 bits in length, and 256 bits is the largest and most powerful key size supported by the AES algorithm, providing an astronomically large key space of 2 to the power of 256 possible key combinations, which is a number so incomprehensibly large that even the most powerful computers ever built or ever likely to be built could not search through all possible keys in any reasonable amount of time, and we then call GenerateKey, which triggers the actual key generation process and produces a brand new randomly generated secret key object that is completely different and unique every single time the program runs, because it is generated from cryptographically strong random entropy sources. We call cipher.getInstance and pass the string AES to it, which retrieves and initializes a concrete implementation of the AES encryption and decryption algorithm from the Java security framework, and this cipher object is the actual engine that will perform all the cryptographic transformation work on our data, and we then call cipher.init and pass two arguments to it, which are the constant encrypt_mode and our randomly generated secret key. And this initialization call configures the cipher engine to operate in encryption mode using a specific key, meaning that any data we feed to it will be transformed from readable plaintext into completely unreadable ciphertext, and we then call doFinal and pass the raw plaintext bytes to it, which feeds the entire plaintext data through the AES encryption algorithm and returns the resulting encrypted bytes as a completely unrecognizable and meaningless-looking array of binary data. We use base64 encoding to convert the raw binary encrypted bytes into a clean and printable string representation, because the raw encrypted bytes produced by the AES cipher contain a mixture of byte values, including many that correspond to non-printable and invisible control characters that cannot be meaningfully displayed in a console or stored in a text-based system like a database column or a configuration file, and base64 encoding solves this problem elegantly by mapping every possible byte value to one of 64 printable ASCII characters, producing a longer but completely safe and universally displayable and storable string representation of the encrypted data that can be transmitted and stored anywhere that plain text is accepted without any risk of corruption or misinterpretation. We reinitialize the exact same cipher object by calling cipher.init again, but this time passing decrypt_mode along with the exact same secret key that was used during encryption, which reconfigures the cipher engine to operate in decryption mode, meaning that it will now reverse the AES transformation and convert ciphertext back into plain text, and we then call doFinal on the encrypted bytes, which feeds the encrypted binary data through the AES decryption algorithm using the same key and reverses the entire encryption process, perfectly reconstructing and returning the original plaintext bytes exactly as they were before encryption took place, confirming that the entire encryption and decryption cycle completed successfully and that not a single byte of the original message was lost or corrupted during the process. The secret key is the single most critical and irreplaceable component of the entire AES encryption system, because without the exact same key that was used to encrypt the data, the encrypted bytes are completely and permanently meaningless and indecipherable to anyone who possesses them, because the AES algorithm is specifically designed so that it is computationally infeasible to recover the original plaintext from the ciphertext without knowing the key, even if the attacker knows every detail of how the AES algorithm works. And this is precisely why key management, which encompasses all the practices and systems involved in securely generating, storing, distributing, rotating, and destroying cryptographic keys, is universally recognized and acknowledged by security professionals as the single hardest and most challenging problem in the entire field of cryptography, because the mathematical strength of AES encryption is completely irrelevant and provides zero protection if the key itself is poorly managed, stored insecurely, accidentally exposed, transmitted over an unencrypted channel, or otherwise compromised in any way. Hashing is one of the most important concepts in security. Almost every security system you interact with daily relies on hashing, from logging into a website to verifying a software download is genuine. The key properties of a good hash function are four. First, deterministic. The same input always produces exactly the same hash. Second, one-way. Given a hash, it is computationally infeasible to find the original input. Third, avalanche effect. Changing even one character in the input produces a completely different hash. Fourth, collision resistant. It is computationally infeasible to find two different inputs that produce the same hash. For password storage, the workflow is critical to understand. You never store a user's password. When they register, you compute the hash of their password and store only the hash. When they log in, you compute the hash of the entered password and compare it to the stored hash. If they match, the password is correct. Even if your database is stolen, the attacker has only hashes, not passwords. However, basic SHA-256 alone is not enough for passwords. The problem is rainbow tables, pre-computed lookup tables of hashes for millions of common passwords. If an attacker has SHA-256 hashes and a rainbow table, they can find weak passwords instantly. SALT is the solution. A random unique string added to each password before hashing. Even if two users have the same password, their salts are different, so their hashes are different. Rainbow tables become useless. For password hashing specifically, use BCRYPT, SCRYPT, or Argon2. These are deliberately slow, designed to take 100 milliseconds rather than microseconds. For a legitimate user logging in once, 100 milliseconds is imperceptible. But for an attacker trying billions of guesses, it becomes computationally impossible. SHA-256 is too fast for passwords. Use it for integrity checks and digital signatures instead. We call messageDigest.getInstance and pass the string SHA-256 to it, which retrieves and initializes a concrete implementation of the SHA-256 cryptographic hashing algorithm from the Java security framework, and this messageDigest object serves as the engine that will perform all the actual hashing computations, and we then call the digest method on it and pass the raw input bytes to it, which feeds the entire input data through the SHA-256 algorithm and returns the resulting hash as a fixed size array of 32 raw binary bytes, and we then use hex format to convert those raw binary bytes into a human-readable hexadecimal string representation, because raw binary bytes are not meaningful or displayable to humans, whereas a hexadecimal string allows us to clearly see and compare and store the hash value in a readable and standardized format. We demonstrate two critically important and fundamental properties of cryptographic hash functions by hashing the string hello with a capital H and the string hello with a lowercase h, and observing that despite the two inputs being virtually identical and differing by only a single character, the two resulting SHA-256 hash values are completely and dramatically different from each other, with no visible similarity whatsoever between them, and this property is known as the Everland effect, and it means that even the most microscopic and seemingly insignificant change to the input data produces a completely unrecognizable and entirely different hash output. And we also demonstrate the deterministic property of hash functions by calling the hash function twice with the exact same input string hello and observing that both calls produce perfectly identical hash values every single time without any variation, confirming that a given input will always produce exactly the same hash output, no matter how many times it is computed or on what machine or at what time. We use secure random to generate cryptographically strong and unpredictable random bytes for use as a salt value, and it is absolutely essential to understand and remember that regular random, which is the standard random number generator provided by Java, must never be used for any security-related purpose, because it uses a deterministic algorithm that produces a predictable sequence of numbers that a sophisticated attacker can potentially reproduce if they can determine or guess the seed value. Whereas secure random uses sources of true entropy from the underlying operating system to generate genuinely unpredictable random values that cannot be reproduced or guessed by any attacker, and our generate salt method creates 16 random bytes, which gives us 128 bits of salt entropy, which is more than sufficient to effectively prevent pre-computation attacks such as rainbow table attacks. We implement the hash password method, which takes both the password and the salt as inputs and feeds the salt bytes to the messageDigest engine first by calling the update method, which mixes the salt into the internal state of the digest engine before any password bytes have been processed, and then feeds the password bytes to the digest engine by calling the digest method, which completes the hash computation, incorporating both the salt and the password into the final hash result, meaning that the output hash value is mathematically dependent on both the specific salt value and the specific password value together rather than on the password alone. We demonstrate the most important practical benefit of salted password hashing by taking the exact same password string MySecret123 and hashing it twice using two completely different randomly generated salt values, producing two hash values called edhash1 and hash2, and when we compare these two hash values, they are found to be completely and utterly different from each other, with no similarity whatsoever despite having been produced from the exact same password. And this is the entire point of salting, because it means that an attacker who somehow gains access to a database of stored password hashes and sees both hash1 and hash2 has absolutely no way of knowing or deducing that both of these completely different looking hashes were actually produced from the same underlying password, which completely defeats pre-computation attacks and prevents attackers from identifying users who share the same password by simply comparing their hash values. we implement the verification process, which is the mechanism used to check whether a password entered during a login attempt is correct, and this process works by taking the password that the user just entered during login and the salt value that was originally generated and stored in the database when the user first created their account and feeding both of them through the exact same hash password function to produce a new hash value, and then comparing this newly computed hash against the hash value that was previously stored in the database, and if the two hashes match perfectly, it confirms that the user entered the correct password and authentication succeeds, and if the hashes do not match, it confirms that the entered password is wrong and authentication fails. And we also demonstrate that entering a wrong password produces a hash that does not match the stored hash, returning false. And the absolutely critical implementation detail here is that the salt value that was originally generated when the password was first hashed must be permanently saved and stored alongside the corresponding hash value in the database, because without the original salt it is completely impossible to reproduce the correct hash during login verification, and the user would be permanently locked out of their account. RSA was invented in 1977 by Rivest, Shamir, and Adleman, and it remains the backbone of Internet security. The mathematical magic is that it is easy to multiply two large prime numbers together but extraordinarily difficult to factor the result back into the original primes. The public and private keys are derived from this one-way mathematical relationship. The practical implication is revolutionary. You can publish your public key to the entire world. Anyone can use it to encrypt a message to you. But only you, with your private key, can decrypt it. There is no need to securely exchange keys in advance, which was the unsolvable problem with symmetric encryption before asymmetric cryptography was invented. Digital signatures reverse the operation. If Elise wants to prove that a message genuinely came from her and was not tampered with, she creates a hash of the message and encrypts that hash with her private key. This encrypted hash is a digital signature. Anyone can decrypt the signature using Elise's public key and compare the result to their own hash of the message. If they match, the message is authentic and unmodified. If they do not match, either the message was altered or the signature is fake. RSA is slow compared to AES because the mathematical operations involve very large numbers. In practice, RSA is never used to encrypt large amounts of data directly. Instead, TLS and other systems use hybrid encryption. RSA encrypts a random AES key, and that AES key encrypts the actual data. You get the key exchange security of RSA and the speed of AES. We use a key pair generator to simultaneously generate both the public key and the private key together as a mathematically linked and inseparable pair, which is a fundamentally important characteristic of asymmetric cryptography because the two keys are not independently created random values but are instead generated together through a complex mathematical process that establishes a deep and permanent cryptographic relationship between them such that data encrypted with one key can only be decrypted with the other key, and we use a key size of 2048 bits, which is the current widely accepted and recommended minimum key size for RSA-based cryptography that provides a sufficient level of security against modern computational attacks, and the public key when displayed is shown in a truncated form because its full representation is an extremely long base 64 encoded string that would be impractical to display in its entirety. We initialize a cipher object with encrypt_ mode and pass the public key to it, which configures the cipher engine to perform RSA encryption using the recipient's public key, and when we feed our plain text message to this cipher, it produces an encrypted ciphertext that can only be decrypted by the corresponding private key, and it is absolutely critical to understand that even the public key that was used to perform the encryption cannot reverse the process and decrypt the ciphertext, which is one of the most powerful and elegant properties of asymmetric cryptography because it means that the public key can be freely and openly distributed to anyone in the world without ever compromising the security of the encrypted messages, since possession of the public key alone gives an attacker no ability whatsoever to read any of the encrypted data. We initialize the same cipher object with decrypt_mode and pass the private key to it, which configures the cipher engine to perform RSA decryption using the mathematically linked private key that corresponds to the public key used during encryption, and when we feed the encrypted ciphertext to this decryption cipher, it perfectly reconstructs and recovers the original plaintext message top secret message exactly as it was before encryption, demonstrating that the entire encryption and decryption cycle completed successfully and that the cryptographic integrity of the message was maintained perfectly throughout the entire process. We call signature.getInstance and pass the string SHA-256 with RSA to it, which creates a digital signature engine that combines two distinct cryptographic operations into one unified and seamless process, where it first applies the SHA-256 hashing algorithm to produce a fixed-size cryptographic digest of the document being signed, and then applies the RSA signing algorithm to encrypt that digest using the private key, producing the final digital signature, and we call INIT sign and pass the private key to it, which initializes the signature engine for the signing operation, and then we call update and feed the raw bytes of the document to the signature engine, which processes the document content, and finally we call sign, which completes the signing process and returns the raw signature bytes that represent the unique cryptographic fingerprint of this specific document signed by the holder of this specific private key. We perform the verification process by calling INIT verify and passing the public key to it, which initializes the signature engine for verification mode, and then we call update and feed the exact same document bytes to the verification engine, which processes the document content in the same way as during signing, and finally we call verify and pass the original signature bytes to it, which causes the signature engine to independently compute the SHA-256 hash of the document and then use the public key to decrypt the signature bytes and compare the two hash values, and if the two hash values match perfectly, verify returns true, which provides absolute and mathematically guaranteed confirmation that the document was signed by the holder of the corresponding private key and that the document content has not been altered or tampered with in any way since it was originally signed. We perform the tampered document check by creating a modified version of the original document where the value 5000 has been changed to 9000, which simulates a malicious attacker attempting to fraudulently alter the content of a signed document after it has already been signed, and when we run the verification process again using the original signature bytes against this modified document, the verify method returns false, which conclusively proves that the signature no longer matches the modified content, and this demonstrates one of the most powerful and important capabilities of digital signatures, which is that even the most seemingly minor and insignificant change to a signed document, such as changing a single number, produces a completely different SHA-256 hash value that will never match the hash value embedded in the original signature, making it absolutely impossible for any attacker to tamper with the content of a digitally signed document without the tampering being immediately and definitively detected during the verification process. Generating encryption keys programmatically every time is fine for demonstrations but completely impractical in real applications. If you generate a new RSA key pair every time your application starts, anything encrypted with yesterday's key cannot be decrypted today. Keys need to be generated once, stored securely, and retrieved reliably over the lifetime of the application. A key store is the standard Java solution. It is an encrypted file that holds your keys and certificates, protected by a password. Even if someone gets the key store file, they cannot use the keys without the password. Inside the key store, entries are identified by aliases, friendly string names you assign when storing a key. There are three types of entries: A private key entry stores a private key together with its certificate chain, the chain of certificates proving who issued the certificate. A trusted certificate entry stores a public certificate, used for TLS to verify the identity of servers you connect to. A secret key entry stores a symmetric key like an AES key. The modern standard is PKCS12 format, a cross-platform standard supported by OpenSSL, Java, browsers, and every major platform. The older JKS format is Java-specific and has been deprecated as the default since Java 9. In production, key stores are used everywhere. Your web server's TLS certificate is stored in a key store. Your client application trusts certain certificate authorities stored in Java's KCerts Trust Store. Your application's database encryption keys live in a key store managed by a secret system. The Java KeyTool command line utility is the standard tool for managing key store files outside of code. We generate a 256-bit AES key using a key generator which produces a cryptographically strong and randomly generated symmetric encryption key, and this 256-bit key is one of the most powerful and widely trusted key sizes available in the AES encryption standard, providing an astronomically large number of possible key combinations that makes brute force attacks completely impractical, and this freshly generated key is the precious piece of cryptographic material that we need to store safely and retrieve reliably using the key store mechanism. We create a brand new PKCS12 key store instance by calling the load method and passing to null parameters to it, which is a special and intentional way of initializing a completely fresh and empty key store that does not yet contain any keys or certificates or any other cryptographic material, and the PKCS12 format is chosen because it is a widely supported and industry standard format for storing cryptographic keys and certificates that is recognized and compatible with a very large number of security tools and platforms and programming languages beyond just Java, making it an excellent choice for interoperability. We create a secret key entry object that wraps and encapsulates a generated AES key, which packages the raw key material into a standardized container format that the key store system knows how to handle and store properly, and we also create a password protection object that wraps the entry-level password, which is the specific password that will protect this individual key entry within the key store independently of the password that protects the overall key store file itself, and we then call setEntry and pass the alias string MySecretKey along with the secret key entry and the password protection object to store the key inside the key store under that specific alias name, because every single key or certificate stored inside a key store must be assigned a unique alias which serves as its identifying name within the store and allows it to be retrieved later by anyone who knows both the alias and the correct entry-level password. We call the store method and pass a file output stream pointing to the destination file along with the store level password to it, which triggers the key store to encrypt the entire contents of the store using the store password and write the resulting encrypted binary data out to the specified file on disk. And it is very important to understand that to completely separate and independent passwords are involved in this entire process, where the store password is responsible for protecting and encrypting the entire key store file as a whole, making it impossible for anyone without the store password to even open and read the file, and the key password is responsible for protecting this specific individual key entry within the store, adding an additional layer of security that ensures even someone who successfully opens the key store file cannot access a specific key entry without also knowing the correct entry-level password for that particular alias. We perform the loading process by creating a fresh key store instance and calling load on it while passing a file input stream that points to the previously saved key store file along with the correct store password, which causes the key store system to read the encrypted binary data from the file and use the store password to decrypt it and reconstruct the full in-memory representation of the key store with all its stored entries intact. And once the file has been successfully loaded and decrypted, we Call GetKey and pass the alias MySecretKey along with the correct entry-level password to retrieve the specific AES key that was stored under that alias, and the key store uses the entry password to decrypt and extract the key material and return it to us as a key object. We use messagedigest.isEqual to perform a byte-level comparison between the raw byte array of the original AES key that we generated at the beginning and the raw byte array of the key that we just retrieved from the loaded key store, and when these two byte arrays are found to be identical and perfectly matching, it provides definitive and conclusive proof that the key survived the entire store and load cycle completely intact without any corruption, modification, or loss of any bytes whatsoever. And the reason we use messagedigest.isEqual rather than a regular array comparison is that messagedigest.isEqual performs a constant time comparison that is specifically designed to prevent timing attacks, which are a class of cryptographic side-channel attacks where an attacker can gain information about secret values by carefully measuring how long comparison operations take, and finally the successfully loaded and verified key is cast to a secret key object and is immediately ready to be used for performing AES encryption and decryption operations on any data that needs to be protected. Underscore 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 underscore. Security vulnerabilities are overwhelmingly caused not by exotic mathematics but by common coding mistakes that any developer can make if they are not thinking about security. The OWASP Top 10, published by the Open Web Application Security Project, documents the most critical web application vulnerabilities. Year after year, SQL injection, broken authentication, and insecure deserialization appear at the top. SQL injection is the #1 attack. It happens when user input is concatenated into SQL queries without sanitization. An attacker types carefully crafted SQL fragments as their username or search term, and your query executes their malicious SQL prepared statement with parameterized queries completely eliminates this vulnerability. The user input can never become executable SQL. Hard-coded secrets are a silent catastrophe waiting to happen. Developers paste database passwords, API keys, and encryption keys directly into source code. That code gets committed to Git. Git history is permanent. Even if the secret is removed in a later commit, it remains visible in the history. Attackers specifically scan public GitHub repositories for hard-coded secrets and find them constantly. All secrets must come from environment variables, configuration files excluded from version control, or dedicated secrets management systems like HashiCorp Vault or AWS Secrets Manager. Error handling is often overlooked as a security concern. When an exception occurs and you print the stack trace directly to the user, you reveal your internal package structure, class names, framework versions, and sometimes data values. This information helps attackers understand your system and craft targeted attacks. Log detailed exceptions server-side for developers. Return only generic error messages to users. Input validation is defense in depth. Even if your SQL uses prepared statement, validate that an age field contains a positive integer, that an email field matches email format, that a file name does not contain path traversal sequences like two dots and a slash. Defense in depth means multiple layers of protection. If one fails, others catch it. We have a method called buildQueryUnsafe which takes the user-supplied input and directly concatenates it into the SQL query string without performing any cleaning or validation or transformation on it whatsoever, which means that whatever the user types gets pasted directly into the SQL statement as raw text, and when a malicious user supplies an attack string, the output of this method reveals the injected SQL containing the dangerous condition or one. equals 1, which is one of the most classic and well-known SQL injection attacks in existence, and if this unsafe query were executed against a real database, it would completely bypass any intended filtering and return every single user record stored in the entire database table, because the condition or 1 equals 1 is always mathematically true for every row in the table, making it impossible for the database to exclude any records. We have a method called buildQuerySafe, which takes the exact same user-supplied input, but instead of concatenating it directly into the SQL string, it uses a question mark placeholder in the query template, which is the foundation of parameterized queries and prepared statements in Java. And when the attack string is passed to this safe method, it does not get inserted into the SQL logic at all, but instead gets treated and bound as a harmless literal string value that the database engine will never interpret as SQL code, meaning the entire attack string becomes completely powerless and the query executes exactly as intended without any unintended behavior. We have a method called isValidEmail, which performs two distinct and complementary levels of validation on the email address supplied by the user, where the first level checks that the length of the input does not exceed a predefined maximum limit, which protects against buffer overflow style attacks and excessively long inputs that could cause performance problems, and the second level matches the input against a carefully designed whitelist pattern using a regular expression that precisely defines what a valid email address is allowed to look like, and any input that does not perfectly match this pattern is immediately and unconditionally rejected. And this approach of whitelist validation, which means explicitly defining exactly what inputs are considered acceptable and rejecting everything else, is fundamentally and significantly stronger and more secure than blacklist validation, which means trying to identify and block specific known bad inputs, because a blacklist can never anticipate every possible malicious input variation, whereas a whitelist by its very nature rejects anything that has not been explicitly approved. We have a method called isValidAge, which performs straightforward but critically important range validation on the age value provided by the user, and this method checks that the supplied age is not a negative number, which would be physically impossible for any real person, and also checks that it does not exceed 150, which represents a generous but reasonable upper bound for any human age. And while these constraints might seem completely obvious and trivially simple, they are the kind of basic boundary checks that developers frequently forget to implement in real-world applications, leading to situations where nonsensical or malicious values slip through and cause unexpected behavior or security vulnerabilities deeper in the application logic. We have a method called sanitizeName, which uses the replaceAll method combined with a carefully constructed regular expression pattern to process and clean the name value provided by the user, and this regular expression defines a whitelist of characters that are considered safe and acceptable in a name, which in this case includes only standard alphabetical letters, both uppercase and lowercase, as well as spaces and hyphens, and every single character in the input that does not belong to this approved whitelist is automatically stripped out and removed by the replaceAll operation, meaning that when a malicious user attempts to inject a script tag or any other HTML or JavaScript code into the name field, all the dangerous special characters such as angle brackets and forward slashes and quotation marks are completely removed, leaving only the harmless alphabetical text behind, which poses no security risk whatsoever. We have a method called processUser, which begins by attempting to pass the user ID parameter that has been passed to it as a valid integer number using the integer.parseInt method, and this parsing operation is wrapped inside a try-catch block that specifically catches the number format exception, which is the exception that Java throws whenever parseInt is asked to convert a string that does not represent a valid integer number, and when this exception is caught, the method logs the detailed and informative error message to system.err, which is the standard error output stream that is only visible on the server side to system administrators and developers, and this detailed log message includes the actual invalid input value that was received so that the problem can be properly diagnosed and investigated, and crucially the value that the method returns to the calling code or to the end user is simply the generic message invalid request, which reveals absolutely no internal details about the system or the error that occurred, thereby preventing attackers from gaining any useful information about the internal workings of the application through error messages. We have a method called getPassword which retrieves the database password by reading it from an environment variable rather than hardcoding it directly into the source code, which is an absolutely critical security best practice because hardcoded passwords in source code can be accidentally exposed through version control systems or code repositories or log files, and environment variables provide a much safer and more flexible mechanism for supplying sensitive configuration values to a running application, and if the environment variable has not been set and therefore returns null, the method immediately throws an exception rather than silently continuing to run with no password or a default password, and this behavior of failing fast at startup when critical security configuration is missing is significantly safer than allowing the application to continue running in an insecure state because it forces the issue to be discovered and properly addressed immediately before the application begins accepting any real traffic or processing any real data. I hope this explanation helped you clearly understand the security and its core components in a structured and easy way. Continue learning, keep practicing, and stay consistent with your preparation. More detailed concepts are coming next.